Avoid.
So Perashat Lech Lecha. And by the way, like whenever I spoke to my father, always there was Hidushim. There was never a situation where I called up my father and he wouldn't tell me something about the Perashat Shavua or some Hidush in the Torah, but we always,
Wow.
always discuss Perashat Shavua. It was
Wow.
a tremendous zechut and a tremendous blessing that Hashem gave me during my lifetime that I experienced. But
Wow.
okay, here goes. ויאמר אדוני אל אברהם, לך לך מארצך וממולדתך ומבית אביך אל הארץ אשר אראך. So the story of Abraham Avinu starts in this week's parasha. It could have started earlier. It could have, in this week's parasha, Abraham Avinu was 52 years old. So the Torah doesn't describe to us the first 52 years of Abraham Avinu's life. It says it discusses Terach, actually. It discusses Terach, Abraham's father, and it mentions that this is what happened to Terach. And of course, in the course of discussing Terach, it mentions Abraham Avinu because Abraham Avinu was one of his three sons. But the story of Abraham starts now. But, if you look at Harambam, let me read you what Harambam says, because he has a story of Avraham Avinu starting when he was a little boy. And I want to read to you that story. And then I want to ask you a question that Rabbi Nathan Dweck called me up, and he said, I spoke with your father about this, and I don't remember what he said. Do you remember what your father said? And I told him, let me think about it, and then I remembered what my father said. So let me read to you the story. You can all see the screen as I'm sharing it. And the story is here. We'll start from here. Okay. This is dealing with the first generations of humanity after Adam. And it's describing the slow descent into Avodah Zarah that took place. So it says, "Vechevan she'archu sham hayamim, nishtarka Hashem hanichbad vehanora v'pi kol ha'yikum u'meda'atam." And with the passage of time, people forgot about the name of God. It was basically almost sublimated from the consciousness of all of human civilization. And because of this, velo hikiruhu, and because of that, they had no knowledge of God. ונמצאו כל עם הארץ והנשים והקטנים אינן יודעים אלא הסורה של עץ והאבן. And it came out that because of this, the common people, the women, the children, all they were aware about were idols made out of wood and made out of stone. That's all they knew. וההיכל של בניין. And I had somebody in the waiting room, I just let him in. Okay, so this is working. So I just let you in, so that proves that this works. Okay. And basically, they were only aware of the idols of wood, the idols of stone, and there were temples as well. So they were aware as well of the temples. And the people were taught from when they were little children that this is what they should worship. This is who they should pay homage to. And if a person would make a shevu'ah, he would make the shevu'ah in the name of one of these idols. That's what they were taught. This is the way humanity is till today. Humanity until today, they, by and large, with a few exceptions, but by and large, they buy whatever stories the state media tells them. There used to be a time in America where the state media was sort of free and they would kind of say what they wanted. And then there was a little more diversity. But nowadays, the state media is basically run by whoever runs them, and they all have a unity of purpose, and they're less interested in actually telling people information as much as guiding people towards certain beliefs. So that's the way things are today. Well, that's the way it was back then. So why does a person believe that if he worships a piece of wood, it would do him good in his life? Well, he believes that not because it's logical, not because he thought about it. He believes that because he was taught that from a young age. So when you're taught something from a young age, you know, and you're basically taught, don't think, don't contemplate, don't consider the matter. So you don't think, you don't contemplate, you don't consider the matter, and you continue worshiping the piece of wood, and you teach your children to worship the piece of wood. So that's the way it was for many generations. Then there were the wise people. They kind of, hold on one second. והחכמים שהיו בהן, כהון הכומרים וכיוצא בהן. And then there was the priests of the Avodah Zarah. The priests of the Avodah Zarah, they understood a little more. They kind of, there was like some internal knowledge that they had, which they didn't share with the public, right? So they knew some things, but they wouldn't share with the public because that would be against their agenda, and they had an agenda. So מדמים שאין שם אלוה אלא הכוכבים והגלגלים שנעשו הסורות האלו בגללן ולדמותן. They understood a little more. They understood that these pieces of wood, that these idols fashioned by the hands of man, were actually representative of various stars and various celestial entities. So they had a deeper knowledge, right? So for example, a simpleton will just, be aware of the statue, will be aware of the idol. But the more intelligent, they understood the idol is a representation of a god or a higher being, right? But as far as God goes, the creator of the universe, there was no one who knew about a creator. There was no one who had knowledge, with the following exceptions. The first person who had some knowledge of God was an individual called Hanoch. Do you remember who Hanoch was? So you remember that Adam had a son called Hebel, right? And Hebel died. Of course, Cain, Hebel. And then he had a son called Shet. And then the son of Shet, meaning the grandson of Adam, was Enosh. And then there was Kenan. And then there was Mahalalel. And after Mahalalel, there was Yared. And finally, after Yared, or after Yered, he's pronounced both ways, there was a special individual. His name was Hanoch. And this Hanoch, the Pasuk says, and this is what I wanted to read, it says, Vaytalech Hanoch et ha-Elohim. This person, Hanoch, went in the ways of God. He had knowledge of God, he recognized God, and accordingly, he was able to follow the ways of God. And what happened to this Hanoch? It says, with everybody it says, Vayamot, Vayamot, Vayamot. In the case of Hanoch, it doesn't say Vayamot, it doesn't say he died. It says as follows, and this is a pasuk that I wanted to find, and I'm reading it to you now. Vayitalech Hanoch et ha-Elohim. Hanoch, as we noted, would go in the ways of God his whole life, ve'enenu. And at some point, he disappeared. Because he was taken away by God at the age of 365 years, which is a very young age. Nobody died at the age of 365 back then. At the age of 365, Hanoch was taken away. So that's Hanoch. That's what happened to Hanoch. Now, he also mentions, going now back to Harambam, Metushelach was the son of Hanoch, and this Metushelach was the person who lived the longest life, at least recorded in the Torah. explicitly, because the Torah seems to insinuate that Pinchas may have lived a very long life, but Metushelach, it appears, lived the longest life. And what is that? 969 years old. So Metushelach was the son of Hanoch. He was a grandfather of Noah. The Mabul started upon the death of Metushelach, meaning once Metushelach died, comes the Mabul. Noah obviously had knowledge of God. Veshem va'ever. Who is missing from this list? We have Shem va'ever. The other sons of Noah didn't have knowledge of God. So there was Shem, there was Yefet, and there was Ham. Yefet and Ham don't have knowledge of God. Shem, the son of Noah, he does have knowledge of God. After Shem, there was a few generations. There was Arpachshad, there was Shelach, finally there was Eber. So this Eber went in the way of his great-grandfather. He also had knowledge of God. The Chachamim record that Shem and Eber had what they call a yeshiva. What does that mean, a yeshiva? I'll tell you in a moment. And in this yeshiva, Yaakov Avinu studied. Now, what does that mean? Okay, so just so you understand, Adam received 6 mitzvot from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, when Adam received these mitzvot were transmitted orally, and Adam transmitted it until it finally reached Hanoch, who we spoke about before, and then Metushelach, and then Noach, and then Shem and Ever. So these people, they received the traditions all the way from Adam Arishon. The Chacham who speaks about this is Rabbi David Nieto in his book Moteh Dan. Rabbi David Nieto from the 18th century, originally from Livorno, then went to Cambridge, England. So Rabbi David Nieto, one of the great Chachamim, by the way, he speaks about that. Now, when Noah left the Teva, Hashem gave Noah the 7th mitzvah. And so there were Sheva mitzvot Bnei Noah. So the Sheva mitzvot Bnei Noah, that was part of the intellectual and spiritual heritage of Shem and Ever. And when they had their yeshiva was the way that they taught this to the people who were interested in learning this. Okay, and unfortunately, it probably wasn't a very great number of people. But that's the way the world was. The world was rolling forward and just continuing forward with almost everybody being a believer in CNN and, in Avodah Zarah. So they all believed in it. They accepted it uncritically. And that's the way it was. They were gullible, and it's fine. That's the way they were taught. I don't criticize people for believing in these various media outlets, Avodah Zarah, whatever that is, because it's just the way they were raised. So I can't fault anybody, right? I can't fault people for believing in what they're taught. But that's the way the world was. I read that. Finally, the foundation of the world, the pillar of the world, was born. The pillar of the world, Abraham Avinu, was born, and this happened when Noah was 892 years old. So when Abraham Avinu was born, Noah is still alive. Noah is 892 years old, and years later, when I say years later, I mean about 52 years later, that's when the Migdal Bavel takes place. So at this point, that's 48 years later. 48 years later, there's Migdal Bavel. Abraham now is 48 years old. And Noach is still alive, by the way. In the days of Migdal Bavel, Noach is still alive. He's 940 years old. Noach lives till the age of 950. So that means that Noach dies when Abraham is 58 years old, which is interesting because the number 58 actually equals the word Noach in Gematria, because you take the Nun is 50, the Het is 8, so it's very easy to remember. So if anybody asks you how old was Abraham Avinu when Noach died, and the answer is easy, he was Noach. So it's a very nice mnemonic, very nice way to remember it. Nevertheless, this Abraham Avinu was born in the city of Ur. Ur is a city in somewhere between India and Iran. And the king, and this was the center of the empire of Nimrod. And Nimrod was the emperor, so to speak, or the king, as you will. And Avraham Avinu was born in that place. And what happened with Avraham Avinu? Kevan shenigmal etanze. This young man, he began to become independent. He started growing up. And he started in his mind, he started thinking about things, right? Most people don't do that. Most people, they see, the Easter bunny. Mommy, when is the Easter bunny coming? Because that's where they're taught. Or Santa Claus. That's what they believe in, right? So, but Avraham Avinu was a little shrewder. He didn't believe in Santa Claus. He didn't believe in the Easter bunny. And he started thinking about things. He started considering things in his mind. And apparently he was a brilliant person. His mind wouldn't stop working. He was thinking all day, and he was thinking during the daytime, was thinking at night. And he had the following intellectual conundrum. The conundrum was as follows, or the question, I'm sorry. So you look at the sky, and the sky is round, right? So you see the round sky is moving, right? And the stars appear to be embedded in the sky. So this galgal, let's call it a sphere. There's a sphere moving around us. The earth is stationary. And there's a sphere with the stars traveling around, and it's always moving. And his question was as follows: What is the force that impels the sphere to be in constant motion? How could it be that there is nobody guiding the sphere to turn in a particular fashion? There must be something guiding it. And furthermore, who is actually turning it? Meaning, there's somebody saying it should be turned like this, but who's actually causing it to turn? Can the sphere be turning itself? I mean, it's inanimate. So an inanimate object doesn't have any internal, force within it saying, do this, and then it does this. It's not alive. Did somebody, Avraham Avinu asked himself, again, he's a young child, a very young child actually, and he's asking himself, well, who taught the sphere what to do? Who told the sphere what to do? In any event, I'm sorry, it's my mistake. I'm sorry, wipe out the last 30 seconds, my mistake. Avraham Avinu had nobody teaching him. Right? This is all on his own thinking. He was among the stupid idolaters, because you do have to be stupid to believe in idolatry, but nevertheless, he was with these people, and therefore he was all alone. Avraham Avinu was all alone. There was nobody he can relate to and explain his questions to, because nobody even bothered to ask the question. Now, to make matters even worse, Ve'aviv ve'immo, his own mother and his own father, Ve'chol ha'am, and all of the people around him, obedim avodah zarah, they all believed in idolatry, and they all worshipped the idols. Now, initially, he was a child. His father takes him by the hand, walks into the temple of Isis, to the temple of Poseidon, to the temple of the Pleiades, and he would worship the idols with his father. That's what he was doing. But as he was doing this, he was beginning to consider what he's doing. And finally, he found a road. And this road was a road that would take him into the path of truth. He figured out how to find that road. That's not easy. Right. Vehevin kav hasedek. And he understood what is the correct way to evaluate truth and distinguish it from falsehood. That's not easy, by the way, right? That's not easy, because, again, if you're surrounded by a civilization of low IQ, unintelligent people, it's a bit hard to break that grid and see outside the grid. But he found out how to do it. And all this was done internally. Nobody helped him. Until finally, on pure intellectual power, God didn't speak to him. God did not speak to him at this point. This is pure power of intellect. He reaches the conclusion that there is only one God. And he understood that not only is there a single God, but this God guides the universe. And not only does this God guide the universe, he understood that this God is the creator of everything. And finally, conclusion number 4, there is no other God either than him. So let's just summarize the 4 conclusions because they're astounding conclusions, right? Number 1, there is a single God. Number 2, this God is a creator of everything. Creation ex nihilo. So if God is a creator of everything, that means that God is not part of the world by definition, right? If the world existed for, forever, then, you can say God is part of the world, right? And then you have a universe, and within the universe you have stars, and you have galaxies, and you have nebulae, and you have planets, and whatever else you have, and you have gods, or you have a God. And that God is subject to the rules of the universe. Avraham Avinu understood that God created all of existence, and therefore God is not part of that existence because he created the existence. So again, I'm just looking at those 4 conclusions.
Isn't 1 and 4 the same?
I'm sorry?
1 and 4, aren't they the same?
Well, that's a good point. Initially, the way this happened is, let me explain to you the intellectual stages, because Rambam is bringing this in the order that Abraham Avinu thought this, right? And I want to show you how it's not exactly the same, because I think that's a great question, by the way. It is a very good question. So look at the intellectual stages. Stage number 1, he realizes there is only one God, okay? But that God doesn't necessarily have to be the creator. That God also doesn't have to be the guide of the universe, right? So stage number 2, he realizes this God is mashkiach al haberiyot. He did not leave the universe, because among the Aristotelian and Greek thinkers, there is an idea that yes, there is a God, but this God has nothing to do with the world. After he created the world, he left the world. Azab Elohim et haaretz, as the Navi says, right? So Avraham Avinu, stage number 2, he realizes as he's thinking, he says, this God is guiding the world. Okay. Then he continues thinking. He says, well, how can the God be guiding the world? Well, the Galgal is always moving. So you tell me, where does the Galgal get the energy to always move? Well, he said, the answer is God. God is moving the Galgal. Well, then you begin to think a little more, where does God get all the energy to always be creating the world? And the answer to that is stage number 3. He's not part of the existence. He created the laws of existence, and therefore he is not bound by those rules. The only way to explain, you see the conundrum that Avraham was thinking of? He's looking at the Galgal. The Galgal is always moving. Where does unlimited energy come from? Well, the only way there can be unlimited energy is from God. But wait, so where does God get the unlimited energy? And the answer to that is, you have to posit that God is not part of the world. Well, how could God not be part of the world? Simply, he was never in the world because he's the creator of the world. And therefore he's not subject to the rules of the world. So that's how the Galgal is always moving. You understand the intellectual development from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3. And finally, the last point, once he realizes that God is not part of the world, that God is the creator of everything, he also realized that God is at a level of existence, because there's different hierarchies in existence, right? So the level of God's hierarchy, his existence is different than all other existences, and it is completely unique. So he realized that this God is not just one God within the world, but rather one God outside the world and above the world. That's ben b'chol hanimsa elo achus mimenu. There is no other God other than him. Do you understand now the intellectual progression?
Yeah, but from an intellectual perspective, it doesn't prove that there's no other gods that are outside of the world. This God, fine, he's outside of the world. What if there can be multiple gods that are outside of the world?
Yeah, because the minute you say that there are multiple things or multiple entities and there's something governing those, then they have a common existence, right? There's a common denominator. One is stronger than the other, one is weaker than the other, one is bigger, one is smaller. I mean, but there's going to be some differentiation, and then they exist by opposition to each other, and that means that there is some rule above them. But the brilliance of Avraham Avinu was realizing that this God was alone in his sphere of existence, let's call it that, for lack of a better word, and that all of the creations and everything else are created by him. That was, again, this is the intellectual process. You use the word prove. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was trying to determine things intellectually, and he reached this conclusion by pure brain power, right? By pure intellect. So it's not that he was trying to prove it, he was trying to demonstrate it to himself at the intellectual level. He realized that the most reasonable and rational explanation for everything we see around us must be that there is a God guiding and balancing everything in the world. Only one God can do it. If there was two gods, then there would be a discrepancy, there would be a dissonance, there would be a lack of balance, like the famous theory of evolution, where it is survival of the fittest. If the world was survival of the fittest, why is it so perfect and beautiful and harmonious? The whole world should be one big cannibalization festival, but it's not like almost, well, why isn't it? It's not a cannibalization festival. Well, why is that? Precisely because it's one God guiding everything, right? And therefore you don't have survival of the fittest, as Darwin wanted to posit in his book on the theory of evolution, right? Okay, let's continue. Very good questions, by the way. All right. And then he realized everybody's just making a mistake. They're all, what are you going to do? Right. And he realized that because they were in the habit of always paying homage to the idols and always worshiping the idols, he realized that this has caused them to sort of be subsumed by their own stupidity, and they can't break free from it. And when you become subsumed in stupidity, you forget the truth. Right? Very easy to forget the truth, right? And finally, at the age of 40, that's when Avraham Avinu had a definite knowledge of God. But God still did not appear to Avraham. That's the amazing thing. At this point in time, Avraham Avinu is still alone, right? He's alone in the sense that God did not appear to him, and therefore, again, he has nobody to speak with, and even God himself is not speaking yet to Avraham Avinu. So he's 40 years old. So what happens? Since he had this knowledge, this definite knowledge, in Arabic you would say mazbuta, a definite, precise knowledge. That's the language, at least in the Kuzari, mazbuta, right? Kevan shehikir ve'yada, hitchil le'ashiv teshuvot al bnei ur kasdim ve'la'aroch b'neimahem. So he began to argue with the people around him in Ur Kasdim, and he began to question them in a systematic fashion. Veloma, she'en zo derech haemet. And he told them, listen, what you're believing in is just nonsense. She'atem olechim ba, and all of you are going in a way that is based upon falsehoods. Bishber haselamim. And then he became an iconoclast, literally an iconoclast, not just intellectually, but physically. He began to break the idols. Now they were all terrified. He was breaking these idols, and they're like, oh my gosh. Right, but he was breaking the idols. And he told the people, you should only be worshiping the one God who is the God of the world. You want to pray? You want to bow down? Bow down to him. Ulakrib. You want to bring sacrifices? Bring sacrifices to him. Ulnasech, the wine libation. You want to do a wine libation? Don't do it to an idol. Do it in honor of God. Kedeh shiyakiruhu kol haberuim haba'im. Now, Avraham Avinu was intelligent. You know what he was doing this for? This is smart thinking. He wasn't doing it for the old generation. The old generation was beyond help. He was doing it for the new generation, right? So that the new people who are yet to be born, they would be born into a more intelligent society, which offers that idea of the Creator. כדי שלא יטעו בהן כל העם, כמו אלו שהן מדמין שאין שם אלוה אלא אלו. And he taught the people that these idols, not only are they not gods, not only do they represent falsehoods, but they should be destroyed because they are an insult to the one true God, right? And therefore they should be destroyed. So because when you have these idols there, people see the idols and they begin to believe in them, and that is an affront to the true Creator. And what happened? Avraham Avinu was very smart. He was a great debater. And here's where things began to turn. When Avraham Avinu began to defeat the people in his public debates, Nimrod determined that the only way to deal with Avraham Avinu is to kill him. And that's when the Midrash says that Nimrod took Avraham Avinu and threw him into the pit of fire. And a miracle happened to Avraham Avinu. He was thrown into the pit of fire. He escaped the fire and he goes to Haran. Haran is in northeastern Syria. This is recorded in the end of Perashat Noach. The end of Perashat Noach records how Terach takes Abraham, takes the family, and they go to Haran and they stay in Haran. And what happens there? He begins to call to the people. And at this point, Avraham Avinu has confidence in his own abilities because he realizes that intellectually he is superior. Nobody can argue with Avraham Avinu. So now he has more confidence. And he begins to actively speak to the people. He begins to teach the people there is one God and he is the only one that should be worshipped.
Where are you exactly?
Repeat your question.
Where are you exactly? I'm not finding the place.
I'm sorry. We are here. Do you see this?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right. So, just one moment. One moment. Okay. All right. והיה מהלך וקורא ומכבס העם מעיר לעיר ומממלכה לממלכה. And he would go out and proactively gather crowds of people. He would go from one city to the next city. He would go from one kingdom to the next kingdom until he reaches the land of Canaan, the land of Israel. And while he is entering Israel, he is calling upon the inhabitants of Israel to worship the one true God. That's this week's parasha. As Avraham Avinu enters Israel and is traveling through Israel, he is calling upon the name of God. Who is he calling to? He is calling to the local inhabitants of Israel, and he is telling them there is an El Olam. There is a God who governs the world. And this is what happened with Avraham Avinu. We have time to finish the last halakha, which now is a transition from Abraham to the children of Abraham. It says, Avraham Avinu became famous, and people would gather around Abraham to learn from him, and they would ask him questions. And the brilliance of Abraham was that he knew how to speak to people at different intellectual levels, everybody according to their own mind. And in this way, he was able to gather people and bring them away from idolatry and towards belief in one God. Amazing. He had thousands and tens of thousands of followers. That's amazing. Tens of thousands. This is before radio, before internet, before Facebook, before any of that. By the sheer power of his intellect, by the spiritual integrity which Avraham Avinu exuded, people saw him as a person that they wished to follow, and they did follow him. These became part of the household of Avraham Avinu. And he implanted, literally planted in their hearts, this great fundamental premise, which is that there is one God that rules the world. Interesting, Avraham Avinu wrote books. He wrote books. Amazing if one day we will find these books. And he taught these to his son Isaac. And Yitzhak followed the way of his father. He also gathered people. Eventually, Isaac appoints Yaakov, and he has him teach. And so Yaakov Avinu, he does this. I have a theory. There is a famous midrash that says that, one second. Okay. Right. Yes, Avraham Avinu wrote Sefer Yesirah, as somebody commented here. The Sefer Yesirah we have today is not necessarily the Sefer Yesirah written by Avraham Avinu, but Avraham Avinu did write Sefer Yesirah. That is correct. So now, getting back to the point, there's a famous story, of course, with Yaakov and Esav, and at first Yitzhak favored Esav. So wait, but if Yitzhak favored Esav, then why does it say here that Yitzhak taught Yaakov and appointed Yaakov to teach in his place? But I thought he favored Esav. So let me tell you what happened. The Midrash says that after Yaakov Avinu had to run away from the house, before running away from the house, he went to Yeshivat Shem Ba'ever, and he was there studying Torah. I believe that Yitzhak understood what happened, and he appointed Yaakov to take over the academy, which was teaching people Torah. And now Yaakov Avinu, before he runs away, he does the important job of bringing people close to the belief in a single God, one creator to the world, who governs the world and who provides for the world. So that was the message of Abraham, that was the message of Ishaq, and that was the message of Yaakov Avinu. So it's an incredible story. It really is. And it's a story that we should remember, because not all of this is recorded in the Torah Shebichtav. The Torah Shebichtav records very, very little of this, right? But it's an incredible background to the story of the Torah Shebichtav, and this is part, of course, of our tradition. So Rambam is recording this important part of our tradition, and we should all be aware of it. So I thought it would be good to teach you the story so that you are all aware of it. And that's it, unless there's questions. Okay, gentlemen, it was very nice to be back. I'm assuming that at some point in time we're actually going to be studying face to face. I don't know when that's going to happen,